I am Carol, 65 years old, and I just became a widow 3 months ago. My husband Frank left me with precious memories from our 40 years together. Last week, my son Michael sent me a message that left me speechless. "Mom, start packing. I sold the house." What he doesn't know is that I'm already packed, but not for the reasons he thinks. If you're watching this, please let me know where you're from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this story unfolds. My marriage to Frank spanned 4 decades of ups and downs, love and compromise. We met at a neighborhood barbecue in 1981 when I was just 25 and working as a nurse at the local hospital. Frank was 32 and already making a name for himself in real estate investment. He had this confidence about him that drew me in immediately. Not arrogance, but a quiet certainty about his path in life. Frank proposed 6 months later, and we built our life in a modest 3-bedroom home in suburban Massachusetts. While I continued my nursing career, Frank's real estate investments flourished. He had a natural talent for spotting properties with potential, purchasing them at good prices, and either flipping them for profit or keeping them as rental income. As our financial situation improved, one thing remained constant. Frank handled all our money matters. It wasn't something we explicitly discussed. It just evolved that way. He paid the bills, made investment decisions, and planned our financial future. I contributed my nursing salary to our household, but Frank never really consulted me on major financial decisions. "Carol, you focus on taking care of patients. Let me worry about taking care of our finances," he would say whenever I asked questions. At first, it seemed practical. He had the expertise after all. As years passed, though it became clear this arrangement gave him complete control over our assets. Our son Michael was born 3 years into our marriage. From the moment he arrived, Frank doted on him, determined to give him everything he never had growing up. Frank came from modest means, and I think he wanted to spare Michael from ever feeling the financial insecurity he experienced as a child. As Michael grew, so did Frank's business. By the time Michael was in high school, we had upgraded to a beautiful colonial-style home in an exclusive neighborhood. Michael attended private schools, had the latest clothes and gadgets, and never heard the word no from his father. I worried about how this might affect him, but Frank dismissed my concerns. "I want my son to have every advantage," Frank would say. "The world is competitive enough." 15 years ago, when Michael was 23 and had just started his career at a financial services firm, Frank came to me with surprising news. He had purchased a second home in a coastal town in Spain. A second home? "Frank, when did you decide this? And why Spain of all places?" I asked, completely blindsided. Frank explained that he'd been planning it for years. He showed me pictures of a beautiful Mediterranean-style villa with terracotta roof tiles, whitewashed walls, and a view of the blue sea from the terrace. It was stunning, but I couldn't understand why he'd made such a massive purchase without discussing it with me. "Carol, I've been researching retirement destinations for years. The climate is perfect, healthcare is excellent, and the cost of living is lower than here. Plus, the property values are rising. It's an investment in our future," he explained. What surprised me even more was his next request. "I don't want Michael to know about this place," Frank said firmly. "Why would we keep this from our son?" I asked. Frank's expression grew serious. "Michael hasn't learned the value of money. He thinks resources are infinite because I've always provided everything. I love him, but I've watched him make poor financial choices, maxing out credit cards, leasing luxury cars he can't afford. If he knows about this property, he'll see it as his inheritance, not our retirement home. I wasn't entirely comfortable with the secrecy, but I understood Frank's concerns. Michael had grown up with privilege and developed expensive tastes, while Frank had built his wealth through hard work and careful investing. Michael expected immediate gratification. He'd graduated from an expensive private university with a business degree that Frank paid for. But instead of building his career patiently, Michael jumped from job to job whenever things got challenging. Frank didn't stop at just buying the Spanish villa. He also set up a separate retirement account for me that Michael knew nothing about. "This money is for you, Carol. No matter what happens, you'll be secure," Frank insisted. "Promise me you'll keep this between us." I promised, though it felt strange, hiding these assets from our only child. Frank's justification was always the same. "We need to prepare for difficult days ahead. Life has a way of surprising you." The contrast between my spending habits and Michael's couldn't have been more stark. Despite our comfortable lifestyle, I maintained the frugal mindset of my upbringing. I clipped coupons, shopped sales, and drove my cars until they wouldn't run anymore. Michael, meanwhile, seemed to think money appeared by magic. He'd show up in a new luxury car every couple years, take extravagant vacations, and live in an apartment he could barely afford. When Michael married Jessica 8 years ago, I hoped she might bring some financial sense to their partnership. Instead, they seemed to encourage each other's spending habits. Their wedding alone cost more than Frank and I had spent on our first house. Frank paid for most of it, without complaint, though he confided to me his concerns about their financial future. "I won't be around forever to bail them out," he said one night after writing yet another check to help them with a down payment on their home. Little did we know how prophetic those words would become. The call came on a Tuesday morning 3 months ago. I was in the garden, pruning my roses, while planning what to make for dinner. Frank had gone for his usual morning walk around the neighborhood. When my phone rang, I expected it to be him asking me to pick up something from the grocery store. Instead, it was our neighbor Bill, his voice frantic. "Carol, Frank collapsed on the sidewalk in front of my house. The ambulance is here now. They're working on him." The world seemed to stop turning. I dropped my gardening shears and ran 5 blocks without even grabbing my car keys, still wearing my dirty garden gloves. By the time I arrived, the paramedics were loading Frank into the ambulance. His face was ashen gray, and they had already attached a breathing mask and heart monitor. "Ma'am, are you his wife?" one paramedic asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "He's had a massive heart attack. We're taking him to Memorial Hospital. You can follow us there." Our neighbor Bill drove me to the hospital. The entire ride, I kept thinking this couldn't be happening. Frank was only 72. He was active, watched his diet, had regular checkups. There had been no warning signs. At the hospital, I was escorted to a small waiting room while they worked on Frank. After what felt like hours, a doctor in scrubs approached me with an expression I recognized immediately from my years in nursing. It was the face of someone about to deliver the worst possible news. "Mrs. Wilson, we did everything we could. Your husband's heart attack was too severe. I'm so sorry for your loss." The next few days passed in a blur. I called Michael, who flew in from Chicago the next day with Jessica. I contacted Frank's siblings. Our friends arranged the funeral service. I moved through these tasks like an automaton, unable to fully process that Frank was gone. 40 years of marriage ended in an instant on a sunny Tuesday morning. The funeral was well attended. Frank had been respected in the business community and had many friends. Michael gave a touching eulogy about his father's generosity and business acumen. Throughout the service, he stayed close to me, holding my arm and making sure I was comfortable. It wasn't until after the reception at our home that I began to notice a change in Michael's behavior. As the last guests were leaving, he pulled me aside. "Mom, we need to talk about practical matters," he said. "Dad's will, the house investments. Have you spoken to his lawyer yet?" I was taken aback by his timing. Frank had been buried just hours ago. "Michael, I can barely think straight right now. Can we please have this conversation later?" He backed off, but I could see impatience in his eyes. "Of course. I just want to make sure everything's taken care of. Jessica and I can only stay a few more days before we need to get back." That night, after Michael and Jessica had gone to the guest room, I sat alone in Frank and my bedroom, finally allowing myself to fully feel his absence. The bed seemed enormous without him, the house painfully quiet. As I was about to turn off the lamp, I heard voices from downstairs. Michael and Jessica were talking in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but something made me get up and move to the top of the stairs, where I could hear them clearly. "We need to know what Dad left," Michael was saying. "The market's been down, and you know we're overextended on the house." "Do you think he left everything to your mom?" Jessica asked. "I don't know. Dad was traditional. I'm sure he made provisions for her, but there must be investments, insurance policies. The house alone is worth over $1 million. We could really use even a portion of that right now," Jessica said. "The credit card companies keep calling." I quietly returned to my bedroom, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. Was this why Michael had been so attentive? Not concerned for me, but for what he might inherit the next morning, I called Harold Bernstein, Frank's attorney, for the past 20 years. He agreed to meet with me privately before the official reading of the will. Harold's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, filled with leather-bound books and smelling of lemon polish. He embraced me warmly when I arrived. "Carol, I am so sorry about Frank. He was not just a client, but a dear friend." Once we were seated in his office, Harold's expression became serious. "Frank asked me to speak with you alone before I meet with the family. There are things he wanted you to know privately." What Harold revealed next left me speechless. Frank had indeed prepared extensively for the possibility of his death. The house in Spain was titled solely in my name. He had also established a substantial retirement fund for me with a financial institution in Spain, again in my name only. There were insurance policies and investments that would provide me with comfortable income for the rest of my life. Frank was very specific about keeping certain assets separate from the general estate, Harold explained. He wanted to ensure your security, regardless of circumstances. "Did he think Michael would contest the will?" I asked. Harold chose his words carefully. Frank was concerned about Michael's financial judgment. He loved his son, but he wanted to protect you from potential complications. When I left Harold's office, I felt both grateful for Frank's foresight and troubled by the implications. Had Frank anticipated Michael's reaction? Had he seen something in our son that I'd been blind to? I decided then not to tell Michael about the Spanish house or the separate retirement fund. I would wait and see what unfolded. Frank had kept these assets secret for a reason, and I would honor his wishes until I understood why. In the weeks following Frank's funeral, Michael's visits became more frequent, but the nature of those visits changed. What initially seemed like concern for my well-being gradually revealed itself as something else entirely. Michael would drop by unannounced often when I was sorting through Frank's papers or organizing his belongings. He would casually ask questions about bank accounts, investment portfolios, or property deeds. At first, I thought he was trying to help me navigate the financial aspects of losing a spouse. Soon, however, I realized he was fishing for information about his potential inheritance. Did Dad ever mention any investments he made? He would ask while helping me go through Frank's home office. Or, Mom, have you found any safe deposit box keys? Dad must have had one for important documents. I began to learn more about Michael's life than I had known before. Despite his job at a prestigious financial firm in Chicago, he and Jessica were struggling financially. They lived in an exclusive neighborhood in a house they could barely afford. Jessica didn't work, focusing instead on maintaining their social status through charity committees and country club memberships. Their 2 children attended expensive private schools, and the family took lavish vacations twice a year. What shocked me most was discovering the extent of their debt. One afternoon, Michael left his laptop open while taking a call in the garden. A bank statement was visible on the screen, showing credit card debt exceeding $70,000. Another window showed past due notices for their mortgage. I began to understand why Michael was so interested in Frank's estate. He wasn't just hoping for an inheritance, he was desperate for it. About a month after Frank's passing, Michael invited me to dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. Jessica was unusually attentive, refilling my wine glass and asking about my plans. Mom, Jessica and I have been talking, Michael said as dessert was served. We're worried about you being alone in that big house. We think you should consider moving to Chicago to be closer to us. That's very thoughtful, I replied cautiously. But my friends are here. My garden. I'm not ready to leave. We understand, Jessica said, patting my hand. But the house must have so many memories of Dad. Isn't it painful? Those memories comfort me, I said. Michael leaned forward. We have plenty of space. We could convert our finished basement into a beautiful apartment for you. You'd have privacy, but wouldn't be alone. Their basement. They wanted me to live in their basement. Later that night, I drove them back to their hotel. As they got out of the car, Michael forgot his phone on the seat. I grabbed it to return it and accidentally saw a text message notification from Jessica. Did she go for it? We need to list her house ASAP to cover the Wilsons' loan. The Wilsons were their neighbors, whose private school loan they had apparently guaranteed. I returned the phone without letting on what I'd seen. The next day, I went to the grocery store and ran into my neighbor Susan, who mentioned seeing Michael at the local real estate office. Is he helping you sell your house? She asked innocently. That evening, I pretended to go to bed early, but sat by my bedroom window. Sure enough, around 9 p.m. Michael slipped out and returned an hour later. I later found real estate listing agreements in his briefcase when he left it open in the living room. Meanwhile, Michael had begun accessing my financial documents. Bank statements went missing from my desk drawer, only to reappear in slightly different positions. My computer showed browsing history for accounts I hadn't checked. When confronted, Michael became defensive. Mom, I'm just trying to help you organize Dad's affairs. You don't understand these financial matters. I decided to play along. I told Michael that Frank had been more conservative with his investments than everyone thought. I implied that medical bills and business setbacks had reduced our savings significantly. I watched the disappointment and anxiety flash across his face. But the house is paid off, right? He asked, with forced casualness. Your father and I worked hard to pay off the mortgage. I confirmed, not mentioning that Frank had paid it off 15 years ago. As days passed, Michael's attitude toward me shifted from solicitous to impatient. He began making comments about how I didn't understand the value of assets and how the house was too valuable to just sit on. He suggested I wasn't thinking practically about my future. The son who had once looked at me with love and respect now saw me as an obstacle to solving his financial problems. The realization broke my heart, but it also opened my eyes. Frank had seen this potential in Michael long before I had, and he had prepared me accordingly. 2 months after Frank's death, I was adjusting to my new reality. Friends checked on me regularly. I'd joined a widow's support group at the community center, and I was slowly sorting through Frank's possessions. I hadn't decided what to do about the house in Spain yet, but I took comfort knowing it was there as an option. Then came the bombshell that changed everything. I was in the garden when Michael pulled into the driveway. His expression as he approached told me something significant had happened. He clutched a folder of papers and wore what I recognized as his business negotiation face. A look Frank had always said Michael put on when he was trying to seem more confident than he felt. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, not bothering with a greeting. We sat at the patio table, the roses I'd been tending, fragrant in the late spring air. "I've sold the house," he stated flatly, sliding some papers toward me. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean?" "This house. I've accepted an offer from a developer. They're planning to tear it down and build 2 new homes on the lot." The shock must have shown on my face because Michael quickly continued. "Don't worry, I negotiated a good price, $1.4 million. Of course, after capital gains and the broker's commission, it'll be closer to $1.2 million. My hands trembled as I looked at the sales contract. "Michael, this isn't your house to sell." His expression hardened. "Actually, it is. Dad put the house in both our names years ago. I'm on the deed as joint tenant with right of survivorship. Legally, I have every right to sell." I remembered Frank mentioning something about adding Michael to some property documents when Michael was in his 20s. It was before Michael's spending habits became concerning, when Frank still believed Michael would mature into responsible adulthood. "You can't just sell our family home without discussing it with me," I said, my voice rising. "I live here. This is my home." Michael had the audacity to look annoyed. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is way too big for one person. You're alone now. It makes financial sense to liquidate this asset." Liquidate this asset. This isn't an investment property, Michael. This is where I've lived for 30 years, where you grew up, where your father and I built our lives. "And now Dad is gone," Michael said bluntly. "Things change. The sale closes in 30 days. You need to start packing." I felt as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. "Why would you do this? Where am I supposed to go?" For a moment, Michael looked uncomfortable. Then he straightened his shoulders. "Jessica and I have a financial situation that needs immediate resolution. We've overextended ourselves, and some investments didn't pan out. So you're making me homeless to solve your financial problems." "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You're not homeless. You can move in with us, like we discussed, or use some of the proceeds to buy a small condo. It's a win-win. You downsize to something more appropriate, and I resolve some pressing issues." I tried reasoning with him. I reminded him of family holidays in this house, the marks on the kitchen doorframe, tracking his growth, the backyard where Frank had taught him to throw a baseball. None of it mattered. Michael had dollar signs in his eyes. "The decision is made," he said, finally standing up. "I'll help you find a place and get moved. 30 days, Mom. The new owners want to break ground immediately." After Michael left, I sat in the garden for hours, alternating between tears of sadness and anger. How could my own son do this to me? Was money really more important than my well-being? I finally called Harold, who confirmed my worst fears. Frank had indeed added Michael to the house deed when Michael was 25, hoping to avoid probate issues later. It had been an act of love and trust, made before Michael's financial irresponsibility became apparent. "I'm so sorry, Carol," Harold said. "Frank never updated that arrangement. Michael does legally have the right to sell without your consent." Harold promised to review the sale documents and ensure I received my fair share of the proceeds. But the reality remained. In 30 days, I would lose my home. That night, I cried myself to sleep, clutching Frank's pillow, which still held a faint trace of his cologne. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and deeply afraid of what would come next. But as morning dawned, something shifted inside me. Frank's words echoed in my mind. "We need to prepare for difficult days ahead." He had seen this coming, or at least the possibility of it, and he had prepared. I still had the house in Spain. I still had the retirement fund. And most importantly, I had a choice. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The shock and betrayal remained, but they were now accompanied by something else: determination. Frank had prepared me for this moment, and I would not waste his foresight. I called Harold immediately. "I need to access everything related to the Spanish property," I told him, "and I need your complete discretion." Harold understood immediately. "Come to my office this afternoon. I'll have all the documents ready." Over the next few days, I developed a comprehensive plan. The house in Spain was completely mine, a beautiful 3-bedroom villa in a coastal town called Javea on the Costa Blanca. It was fully furnished and located in an area with a substantial expatriate community, including many Americans and British residents. The retirement account Frank had established contained enough funds to support me comfortably for the rest of my life, especially given the lower cost of living in Spain compared to Massachusetts. My first step was to learn about my new potential home. I began taking online Spanish lessons every night after Michael left. I joined Facebook groups for expatriates living in the Costa Blanca region. I researched healthcare residency requirements, banking, and transportation. I even found a local English-language newspaper with information about community activities. Harold connected me with a Spanish attorney who helped me understand the legal aspects of relocating and living as an American in Spain. We arranged for the retirement funds to be properly structured for international access. Next, I needed to prepare my belongings. Michael expected me to pack, but not for the destination I had in mind. I began a careful sorting process, dividing my possessions into categories: items to ship to Spain, items to sell, items to donate, and items to leave behind for Michael to deal with. I worked methodically, room by room, when Michael wasn't around. I focused on irreplaceable mementos, photo albums, Frank's watch collection, the handmade quilt from my grandmother jewelry with sentimental value. I researched international shipping companies and chose one with experience moving household goods to Spain. They would pack and ship my essential items directly to my new address. For larger furniture and household goods, I contacted an estate sale company who agreed to conduct a sale immediately after I departed. The proceeds would be deposited directly to my new Spanish bank account, which Harold helped me establish remotely. Throughout this process, I maintained a careful facade whenever Michael visited. I appeared resigned and slightly depressed, exactly as he expected a displaced widow to behave. I asked appropriate questions about condos and retirement communities, pretending to consider the options he suggested. I even toured a few properties with him, noting how he steered me toward the least expensive units. "This 1-bedroom is perfect for you, Mom," he would say. "You don't need anything bigger now that you're alone." Meanwhile, Jessica called with an exciting update. They had cleared out their garage and could convert it into a cozy apartment for me if needed. The garage, Not even the basement they'd initially offered. We could put in a small bathroom and kitchenette, Jessica explained, as if offering me a luxury suite. It would be like your own little cottage. What struck me most during this period was that neither Michael nor Jessica ever asked what I wanted. They never inquired about my feelings regarding leaving the home where I'd spent decades. They never questioned whether I had dreams or plans of my own. In their minds, I was just an old woman who needed to be situated somewhere convenient and inexpensive so they could access what they believed was their inheritance. One evening, Michael brought up the division of the house sale proceeds. Mom, Jessica, and I were thinking, since we'll be taking care of you in your golden years, it makes sense for us to manage most of the money from the house. We could invest it for you. I nodded non-committally, wondering what taking care of me meant in his mind. Storing me in their garage like seasonal decorations. As the closing date approached, I finalized my arrangements. My passport was updated, my important documents were secured, and my essential belongings were packed in unmarked boxes that Michael assumed contained items for my new small place. I booked a one-way flight to Alicante, Spain, scheduled for the day after closing. Harold arranged for my portion of the house proceeds to be wired directly to my Spanish bank account. The international shipping company came when Michael was at work, disguised as regular movers, helping me downsize. They took the carefully marked boxes containing my treasured possessions and promised delivery to Spain within 3 weeks. Throughout this process, I maintained my act. I complained about having to leave, asked Michael for help with decisions, and appeared overwhelmed and dependent. All the while, I was executing a plan that would shock him to his core. The night before closing, Michael came by with papers for me to sign. As he was leaving, he said something that confirmed I was making the right choice. "Don't worry about anything, Mom. I'll take good care of everything Dad worked for." Not, "I'll take good care of you," but everything Dad worked for. In that moment, I knew Frank had been right all along. The day of closing arrived with perfect late spring weather. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the home I was about to leave forever. I had slept little the night before, a mixture of sadness and anticipation keeping me awake. Michael arrived early, dressed in his best suit. "Big day, Mom," he said, his excitement barely contained. The buyers increased their offer by $25,000 at the last minute. "How nice for you," I replied quietly. "For us," he corrected, though we both knew he didn't mean it. We drove to the title company in separate cars. Michael in his luxury SUV, me in my modest sedan, that would be donated to a local charity later that day. Throughout the closing process, Michael handled most of the conversation, presenting himself as the concerned son, helping his elderly mother through a difficult transition. I signed where directed and said little. Once the papers were signed and the transaction complete, Michael took me to lunch at an expensive restaurant to celebrate. To new beginnings, he toasted, clinking his wine glass against mine. If only he knew how true that was. After lunch, Michael drove me back to the now-sold house. "I've arranged for a moving company to come tomorrow for whatever furniture you're keeping," he said. "They'll take it to storage until you decide where you're going." "That's thoughtful," I replied. "Jessica and I can pick you up tomorrow afternoon. You can stay with us until we figure out your permanent situation." I nodded, not committing to anything. Before leaving, Michael surveyed the house with satisfaction. "The developers are getting a bargain. They'll make a fortune building 2 houses on this lot." After he left, I sat on the porch swing Frank had installed when we first moved in. I allowed myself 1 hour of nostalgia and tears, saying goodbye to the home that had witnessed so much of my life. Then I dried my eyes and got to work. I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter where Michael would easily find it tomorrow. Inside was a letter I had carefully composed over several days. Dear Michael, by the time you read this, I will be on my way to my new home in Javia, Spain. Yes, Spain. What you don't know is that your father purchased a beautiful villa there 15 years ago. He put it solely in my name, along with a substantial retirement fund that will support me quite comfortably for the rest of my life. Frank saw something in you that I was blind to for too long, a sense of entitlement to the fruits of his labor without understanding the work and sacrifice that created it. He prepared for this day, knowing that once he was gone, you might see me as access to his assets rather than as your mother who loves you. I know about your financial troubles. I know you sold our family home to solve them. I know you plan to keep most of the proceeds while relegating me to your garage or a tiny condo. What breaks my heart isn't losing the house. It's losing the son I thought I raised, a man who would protect his mother rather than exploit her vulnerability. Perhaps someday you'll understand that your father's greatest gift to you wasn't financial. It was the example of his character and work ethic. Money can be replaced. Integrity, once lost, is much harder to recover. I hope you find your way to becoming the man your father always believed you could be. With love, despite everything, Mom. I reread the letter, wondering if it was too harsh, but the truth needed to be spoken. I sealed the envelope and wrote Michael's name on it. Then I finished my final preparations. My suitcases were already in the car. The donation center had picked up the last items that afternoon. The house was nearly empty, except for some furniture and boxes Michael assumed were for my next residence. That evening, I took one final walk through each room, touching door frames, looking out familiar windows, remembering the life Frank and I had shared here. I slept that night on a sleeping bag in our empty bedroom, surrounded by the echoes of 40 years of marriage. At dawn, I rose, packed my sleeping bag, and took one last look around. Then I got in my car and drove to the airport, leaving behind the house, but taking with me the love and memories it contained. As the plane lifted off American soil, I felt a mixture of grief and exhilaration. At 65, I was starting a completely new chapter of my life in a foreign country. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. My phone buzzed with text messages from Michael. As the plane taxied, "Mom, where are you? The movers are here." Then, "Mom, call me ASAP." And finally, just before takeoff, "Found your letter. This is unacceptable. Call me now." I turned off my phone, leaned back in my seat, and closed my eyes. Frank had prepared me for this day, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. 6 months have passed since I arrived in Spain, and my new life has taken shape in ways I never could have imagined. My villa in Javea sits on a hillside with views of the Mediterranean. The whitewashed walls and terracotta roof blend perfectly with the surrounding landscape of pine trees and flowering shrubs. From my terrace, I can watch fishing boats heading out in the morning and returning with their catch in the afternoon. The initial adjustment was challenging. Despite my online Spanish lessons, the language barrier proved more difficult than anticipated. Simple tasks, like setting up utilities or navigating the local grocery store, became adventures. But the local people have been incredibly patient and kind with this American widow trying to make a new home. I quickly discovered a thriving expatriate community in the area. Within weeks of arriving, I was invited to join a book club for English-speaking residents. Through that group, I met Susan, a retired teacher from Boston, and Margaret, a widow from London, whose husband had also died unexpectedly. They became my guides and friends, helping me navigate everything from local bureaucracy to finding the best fresh bread. My villa came partially furnished, but I enjoyed adding personal touches with local finds. I discovered a passion for Spanish ceramics and textiles, gradually transforming the space into a true reflection of both my past and present. When my shipped boxes arrived from the States, I carefully integrated my treasured mementos into my new surroundings. Frank's favorite chair now sits on my terrace, and our wedding photo has a place of honor in the living room. To my surprise, I found myself thriving in this new environment. The Mediterranean climate has been wonderful for my arthritis, and the walking-friendly town has improved my overall fitness. I have taken up swimming in the sea, something I never imagined doing at my age. The local diet of fresh fish, olive oil, and vegetables has led to weight loss and increased energy. Most significantly, I've returned to nursing in a limited capacity. I volunteer twice a week at a clinic serving the expatriate community. My skills are valued, and the work gives structure to my week while connecting me with both locals and fellow immigrants. Throughout these months, I've received dozens of emails, texts, and voicemails from Michael. The initial messages were angry and accusatory. How could you deceive me like this? And that money should have been part of Dad's estate. Eventually, they shifted to guilt-tripping. Mom, what will I tell people about why you abandoned the family? I responded sparingly, keeping my replies brief and factual. I didn't engage with his accusations or attempts to make me feel guilty. Harold advised me that Michael had consulted with attorneys about challenging Frank's arrangements, but they confirmed everything was legally airtight. The house and accounts were solely in my name, established years before any question of Frank's competence could be raised. 3 months into my new life, the tone of Michael's messages changed again. Financial reality had apparently set in. The house money is gone, he admitted in one email. The investments I was counting on didn't work out. Jessica and I may have to sell our house. I felt sympathy, but remained firm in my boundaries. I suggested financial counseling and recommended they consider downsizing to live within their means, just as Frank had always advised. Then last week, something unexpected happened. I received an email from Michael. Unlike any previous communication, Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. At first, I was angry and felt betrayed. But the more I reflected, the more I realized I'm the one who betrayed you. You were grieving Dad, and all I could think about was what I could get financially. I'm ashamed of how I behaved and the things I said and did. Jessica and I have sold our house. We've moved to a smaller place that we can actually afford. I've started working with a financial advisor to get our spending under control and develop a plan to pay off our debts. It's humbling and hard, but I think Dad would approve of the changes. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become the person Dad and you raised me to be. I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship. Love, Michael. The email brought me to tears. Whether Michael's transformation was genuine or simply a response to financial necessity remained to be seen, but it was a start. After careful consideration, I replied with an invitation. If he and Jessica wanted to visit Spain, I would welcome them, provided they paid for their own airfare. Setting boundaries doesn't mean closing doors completely. To my surprise, Michael accepted. They're planning to visit next month during their children's spring break. I'm nervous about the reunion, but hopeful that it might be the beginning of a healthier relationship. As I sit on my terrace, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean gold and pink, I feel profound gratitude for Frank's foresight. He knew that love sometimes means preparing those you care about for difficult truths. He understood that I would need not only financial security, but the courage to stand up for myself. In protecting me, Frank also gave Michael the opportunity to grow up and face consequences. Perhaps that was his ultimate gift to our son. Not inheritance, but the chance to develop character and self-reliance. I've learned that it's never too late to begin again. At 65, I've created a new home, made new friends, rediscovered my professional identity, and found strength I never knew I possessed. The pain of betrayal has faded, replaced by appreciation for this unexpected chapter of life. I sometimes wonder if Frank somehow knew exactly how everything would unfold. Did he understand not just our financial needs, but our emotional ones as well? Did he prepare me, not only with resources, but with the confidence to use them? Whatever his intentions, his final gift to me wasn't just security, but freedom. Freedom to reinvent myself and discover joy after loss. If you're facing difficult choices with family or wondering if you should start over, remember that it's never too late for a new beginning. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to make a hard decision about family and money? Did it turn out well? Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to make a brave choice. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.